Hi, my costume gurus. Currently, I am in a training and I appreciate that you all are continuing to learn how to sew in my absence. So today, you're going to be learning how to sew on a curve. Wait for the next step. Okay, next up, you are going to be given a pattern piece, which is a piece of paper like this. And on that piece of paper, you will notice that you have an arrow. This arrow indicates where your grain line is on your fabric. Now, you might be asking where your fabric is. I'm also giving each one of you a piece of fabric like this. You're going to need to iron it. You will find the selvages. Remember, the selvages are the finished end with no fraying happening. You will find the selvages. And you will fold your fabric in half, meeting it at the selvages, like this. Then you will iron your fabric flat, so you have two layers and a fold at the end. Once you've ironed your fabric, then your job is going to be to take your pattern and find the grain line on your iron fabric. Now remember, grain runs perpendicular as well as parallel to your selvages. So making sure that I have my arrow lined up with my grain line may look something like this. Okay, now that you have lined up your grain line with your fabric, laid it on top of your double layers, notice that's 2 layers, then it's time to pin your pattern in place. Now, the way you're going to pin your pattern in place is by any means necessary. When you're on a cutting table or a hard surface like this, you can't just stick a pin in and expect it to stay. So you want to make sure that you place your straight pin into the fabric as well as into the paper, keeping it as straight as possible. Notice that the head is not sticking out, nor is the tail, because you're going to need to keep this in place so that you may cut around it. So as I work, just pinning these pieces together. The reason why you're doing this step now is because when you get your shirt pattern and we begin to work on that, you'll have pattern pieces much like what we are dealing with right now, and you'll have to do the same thing with your pattern and your fabric. So now I've pinned everything in place. Okay, next up, cutting out your pattern piece. Now that this is pinned in place, you may want some extra pins up here on top. 1, 2. Now, it's not going anywhere and it is attached to the fabric. So you're going to use your fabric scissors and cut out your pattern piece. Notice that I am using long cuts as much as possible. The shorter your cut, the more jagged your edge is, and you don't want that because then it's harder to match. So as I'm going around, I'm making sure to go right at the edge. Much like that. All right, so. Okay, now that you've removed your pins, you have 2 pieces of curved fabric. You will then place them together because they were already together, so you don't even have to separate them. And it's probably easier if you don't. Placing your pieces together, your job today is going to be to sew on this curve. So just like with everything else, if we're sewing on this curve, we want to place our pins perpendicular to what we're sewing. So your pins will need to start at the beginning of your sewing, like here, and at the end of your sewing, here. Have one in the middle, and then like everything else we pin, find the middle of the middle and pin again. Middle of the middle and pin again, making sure that your edges are lining up. Middle of the middle if you need more control over your fabric. Usually with cotton, this might be a little overkill, but with some of your slicker fabrics or slippier fabrics, it's just enough. So middle of the middle of the middle, don't need a bent pin. Here we are, like little sun rays. Now your curve is pinned. Okay, next up, you have pinned your curves. Now it's time to thread your sewing machine. Okay, so next up, you're going to find your 5/8 inch seam allowance line here. Gonna line up your fabric, starting at the edge of your curve. Make sure your stitch selection is on a 9. Holding on to your threads so you don't lose them. You are going to begin your stitches. Don't forget to backstitch. All right, now you can see I have my 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the curved piece, making sure to clip your threads. I've backstitched at the front, backstitched the back, clipping my threads. All right, next up, I remove my pins. All right, removing my pins. Done that. Now, after I have removed all of my pins, if I flip this inside out right now, you can see it looks pretty good. And if I ironed it, it would probably be really nice, yeah? Notice there's no puckers or weird gathers anywhere that aren't supposed to be there, but it's still kind of boxy. Even if I press it, it would still be boxy because that's the nature of sewing on a curve. Now, to keep that from actually happening a lot in your pattern pieces as well as on this sample, what you're gonna do is you're gonna clip your curves. So, anytime there's a curved piece, you're gonna clip perpendicular to your sewn line. Notice that I'm not cutting into my thread, because then you've just undone all the hard work that you've had. But once you've done it correctly, you will clip your curve. And for a deeper curve, you may have to clip more times. For a shallow curve like this, not as much. And for your pattern pieces, it may even say that you need to grade your curves. So once you have clipped your curve like this, then you would come in and trim again. I'm not asking you to do that for this piece. We may have to do that for your shirt. Now, Flip it inside out. And the next step will be to iron. All right, like everything else we do, we want to make sure we don't have any weird creasy butt things like this. So we're going to be ironing. I will now turn it to time lapse. Okay, and that is sewing on a curve. As you can see, no weird creasy butt thing. Yay. Put your name on it and pin it right over there. All right. Have a good day. Thank you for understanding. If you get finished with this wonderful project in the time allotted, then what I would like you to do is to start sewing numbers to the blue robe marked for the Mathemagician, or start hand sewing letters to King Azaz's robe. And those will be marked out behind each of those actors' names. It's TJ and Lindsay. Thanks so much.